Anthony Arwig here with a YSN Hot Corner. We have kind of a special edition. We're changing things up a little bit. Usually we're interviewing players and coaches, but now we're going to interview the guy that interviews those players and coaches that we've been talking to. One of the leaders in softball media, Justin McLeod, owns Justin's World of Softball, runs that whole universe that is just – you're like the Adam Schefter of softball. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I think that the first thing you got to ask is, finding guys that love softball as much as you and I do, outside of the people that work in it, not exactly the easiest thing in the world. What got you into the softball world, and what gave you the softball kind of love in your heart?
Well, there's a few sports that I've always enjoyed and enjoyed writing about that kind of thing. And that really is softball, baseball, and football. Just enjoyed watching them, enjoyed keeping up with them, enjoyed covering them in the ways I was able to and that kind of thing and what I've done. And it came to a point in time where I wanted to be able to cover one sport specifically, and I wanted to do it to a broad audience, which meant that I had not done that. And of the sports that I really enjoyed and also thought that I could contribute something to, softball was the one that didn't have a media at that point. That was back 2012, and you've had a lot since then, but at that point there really wasn't anything there. And so, I'd always enjoyed it. I enjoyed covering it in the ways and the levels that I could, but at that point was really when, I just said, okay, well, I'm going to cover everybody, kind of started on. And then honestly, it was probably a year and a half into that I think actually what you might caught the bug. I enjoyed it, always loved the sport, covering the game, the athletes, the coach, all that kind of stuff. But once I had kind of gotten my feet into strictly softball, particularly college softball exclusively, that's when I really fell in love with it and decided to make it, to push for it and make it as long-term of a career as I could in that particular sense.
So rewind to, you start this whole Justin World of Softball thing. You want to cover just softball. Man, how did you go from that to having all the connections you do now and having such in-depth coverage of the biggest softball teams in the country, and also going down to Division II and III and covering them too?
Well, I think in terms of the connections, I think it's just a matter of doing things the right way. And I'm not trying to toot my horn when I say that, but one thing, that became evident pretty quickly was the softball media space was just an untapped market. That was something I said at the beginning. It's either an untapped market or it's something that people have tried and failed at, and that was an untapped market. But along with that, people were hungry for it. They were ready to eat it up, but they were ready to eat it up if it was done the right way. So from day one, when I said that, I said, okay, I want to make sure there's some things that I do the same way consistently. I want to make sure that, I don't betray people's trust. I want them to know that what I'm going to say is going to be straightforward. It's going to be honest. If they tell me something, I want them to be able to know I'm not just going to go out and spill that. And then, it's one of those things. I wanted to make cover to everybody. It's easy, and there's plenty of stories and all that. If you say, oh, just Power 5 or just, FBS, but there's plenty of great stories, great players, great coaches, great programs in some of the smaller D1 conferences at D2, D3, and that kind of thing. And as time's gone on, I've been able to tell some of those stories and to, further, my footprint in those markets. And I love doing it. If I had three of me, I'd cover every division, every conference, every team. I have to be a little pickier sometimes. That's something I prioritize from day one, and I tried to hold myself true to, is making sure that I cover everybody. And between that and proving myself trustworthy to people, I think it just kind of is one of those natural progressions that I'm lucky enough to have had.
Do you have any teams or coaches that kind of took a chance on you when you were getting started that are close to your heart because they're the ones that kind of, hey, said this random guy, Justin, that wants to interview for me, I'll do it?
Not particularly. I know back at the beginning, I would reach out for an interview request, and I would kind of give more of the spiel of, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, this is what I want the interview for. Because, just like you say, it's an unknown. And, at first there were some players that, or some SIDs even, that I guess you might say took a chance because it was just nobody in the softball media market at that point. So having somebody outside of local media for some of them was unheard of. But as time went on, I mean, there's some people that, over the years that I've probably, I guess I would say I got closer to that, there were some people who, if there was a certain aspect of something that just because I had never been in the softball market exclusively, at least at first, they were kind of willing to help me had an issue or a question about something that I could just find an explanation to on my own. I've done a lot of studying over the years just because, I want to kind of minimize what I have to, go to somebody else and be like, okay, what do I not, help me out find this thing. I like to be able to at least have an educated question when I go to people. So there's some people who fall into that category. But really back at the beginning, I sought out some people and be like, oh, well, this would be a fun one. I remember actually, at least Cola was one of my first interviews that I ever did. And she's become somebody that I've gotten to know at different times through the years and cover and do more stuff with. So there's a few like that from back in the beginning. But I don't know that anybody comes to mind specifically that, kind of stands out as one of my first that, just kind of took a chance up and said.
What were some of the interviews early on? I mean, you said Elisa Goller, but what were some of the other ones that were like the bigger name? Who was like the first like person you interviewed that as soon as you did it, you said, this is going to blow up?
Ooh, good question. When I first started, literally, I had a prepared set of questions. It was like 5, 6, 7 questions. I'm like a Word document. And every time I did an interview, I would copy paste. Here's my questions for you. Just because it was part of that whole getting my foot in the door, have some kind of content rolling out. First interview that really made me realize it was going to blow up. That's a good question. I mean, some of my first few, and I know I did Elisa Goller. I did Val Arioto her senior year at Cal. So there were a few that I knew, that I sought out because I realized not only was it somebody that I felt would be a good interview and offer a good perspective, but they were also ones that I knew would interest people. So there were a few that fell into that category. I don't know that I could pin it down to somebody, though, that really made me go. Now, there have been some over the years, just based on a certain scenario or whatever, but I don't know that I could pin it down to one early on that really made me go, oh, this is going to be good type of thing, outside of just what I would call the big names.
There have been some controversial stories in the softball world the last couple of years, and I know you've done a great job covering those. When those kind of things come across, how do you kind of handle it? Because you handle it so differently than the ESPNs of the world, where you're authentic and you're real, but you're also fair to both sides. And I think you do a great job. So when those kind of stories come around, maybe a coach is under scrutiny or a coach gets fired for some reason, what are your kind of roadmap to handling those kind of stories?
Well, part of my background is I had several years as a paralegal, worked in the legal field, but that was part of what influenced me when I first started covering softball. I wanted to make sure that I was fair and impartial, straight up the middle. Whether that means just taking this side and making sure I take that side as well, whether that means just telling the story and letting people figure out what comes from one side or the other, but always wanting to be straight up the middle. When it comes to some of those stories over the years, it's definitely been it's always interesting because you want to make sure you're telling the whole story. But for me, I don't like getting into what I call the fringes of it. If I'm reporting a news story, I'm going to tell the story. I may call 20 people and not quote a single one of them. But when I'm publishing the story, I want to make sure I'm telling the whole story. Other times, there's a story that one side begs to be told because it is part of the story. Well, I'm the type that I'm going to tell that side firsthand, if at all possible. But I'm also going to at least make an effort to tell that other side, to have that represented as well, to be able to let people draw their own conclusions. So for me, it all goes back to the same thing that I said when I started, which was I want to be straight up the middle. I want to be fair to everybody. Sometimes that means the story's not as great as it could be because, I could write a great headline and, I could pull one quote and it could have, start a whole Twitter for all I know. I don't like that if it means that I'm sacrificing the actual news quality of my work.
You brought up a great point. The one story can cause a Twitter, fiasco, not a fiasco, but a frenzy. Have you ever had any stories like that like you posted it, and then all of a sudden it took off positive and like caused a huge Twitter kind of frenzy?
There's been a few. Sometimes when I do a story that has some level of controversy to it, whether it's a controversial person or it's something that just kind of gets people wondering, that kind of thing. There's sometimes, like, I remember one story I did. I don't know if you remember, it was several years ago. Sierra Romero, when she was playing pro, one of her first early years, there was a big controversy about one of her bats supposedly being illegal. I believe she got tossed in the game and all that kind of thing. It was a big deal on Twitter and that kind of thing. Well, I remember it was a Sunday morning. I was getting ready for church, and I actually ended up on the phone with Sherry Kemp for 20 minutes, and we went through the whole process there, and we talked, and she helped me out with the things that I didn't know. I ran a story on it explaining the background of all that outside the people, what you heard in the commentators of the online stream or whatever. Some stories like that, that aren't controversial, but that maybe there's an aspect to them or whatever. Those tend to get people on Twitter talking, on social media. One of my things I don't do is I really don't go through and read a lot of comments. If people tag me in a tweet, of course I'm going to see it, but I don't go through and just make a habit of reading tweets, So there's some like that would fall into that category probably. And of course, I mean, anytime I write something that has an opinion in it, there's going to be people who agree and people who disagree. That's the name of the beast. And I knew that coming in. I mean, this is my career. I've known that for a long time. It doesn't bother me. Water off a duck's back is what I like to call it. But yeah, there's been quite a few over the years that have caused some kind of furor for sure.
You said you like to keep it straight up the middle with your writing, and I know you do a good job of that. But are there any teams that, besides all that, you still root for, that like have the, put the little fan shirt on, and teams that you kind of pull for?
No, not really. I mean, there's coaches that I'm friends with that if they succeed, I'm happy for them, and I'll celebrate for them and that kind of thing. And there's coaches that I like to see, maybe for a certain reason, or players for a certain reason I like to see do. But I wouldn't say there's anybody that I root for. Part of doing what I do is I try to be very deliberate in separating that. I may be sitting there on Friday afternoon and a buddy may get a milestone win, or a player with a great story or someone that I've interviewed or whatever may have a career game. And, I may tweet about it. I may congratulate them. I may send them a text message. I'm definitely happy for them. But when it comes time to write the article, so to speak, it's still very up the middle. I'll make sure it's a straight news piece. I do a feature type thing. I try to make sure I write it the same with everybody. So there's not really anybody that I root for, that I cheer for type thing. But of course, the friends that I've made through all the years, and then some people that just because they do things the right way, whatnot, that I do enjoy, seeing them hit milestones and that kind of thing, for sure.
So, I mean, I imagine you have to turn that fan switch on at some point for, football or baseball. So who are some of the teams that you root for when you're not having to keep in mind your journalistic, down the middle?
I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, have been for years. Third generation Cubs fan. It was kind of funny. The NFCA Coaches Convention was in Chicago in 2018. Until that time, I had never been to Wrigley Field. I was a fan for decades and never been to Wrigley Field. So I flew into Chicago, and I got in my Uber, and instead of going straight to my hotel, I had to go to Wrigley. And now this is the first week of December, and it's starting to snow. I'll be danged if I didn't go to Wrigley Field and have the Uber driver take a picture of me next to the Harry Carey statue. I can say I'd been to Wrigley. Definitely a Cubs fan. Been there through a lot of the lean years, the Dusty Baker years, the Lou Piniella years. Happily there for the Joe Madden years. That's my biggest rooting interest when it comes to sports. Outside of softball, I'm definitely a Cubs fan. I was a Peyton Manning fan when he was playing in the NFL. Really liked Peyton Manning. So kept up with him. I don't really have a pro football team that I root for. I like to see Peyton Manning. I always enjoy when Peyton and Tom Brady went at it. Those were must-watch games. I don't root for any colleges. I kind of can't because then it takes away from the impartiality when it gets to softball. So I enjoy a good football game no matter who's playing. I'll watch a little basketball when March comes around. I'm not as much up on the basketball. So I don't watch as much of that, but I'll watch a good basketball game every now and then. But the Cubs are really where my rooting interests lie. I've got an old Cubby Bear from back in the 90s sitting on the shelf in my office, as a matter of fact.
So fast forward to your website now and how big it is. What's your kind of day-to-day routine and your day-to-day operations of Justin World of Softball? You're still putting out content like crazy, even though it's been such a crazy kind of situation with COVID-19. You're still putting out great content. So what's the scope of things now that it's as big as it is?
Well, in all honesty, I wish I could tell you there was. I had it out to the minute by minute. There are some days that I do, but right now it's one of those things. I spend roughly 16 hours a day, give or take, in front of my computer or my phone, for that matter. It can be anything from. There's some days where I can sit there and I can be on the phone for a total of 7 hours. Talking to coaches here, players, or a person here, a person there, whatever. Texting, of course. I try to make sure that I write something every day. I've got some ADD tendencies in me, so sometimes there'll be times where I will, I'll sit down and I'll write, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, get some transcriptions and quotes, some transcriptions. And then, I might have to get up and make a couple of laps around the house type of thing, just to get some of that energy off, distract myself, and then I'll come back. I've got my hand in a lot of activities and projects. So sometimes I'll do some softball, need a break. Well, then I'll go and do another project. I'll come back. I'm a night owl, so I'm usually up until 1, 2 in the morning at the earliest. 7:30, 8 o'clock, and do it all over again. So not much of a routine, I'll say that. During quarantine, it's been different too. In the time I've been doing this, because there's not been a ton of news. And first and foremost, I'm a newsman. I can write a feature. I enjoy writing features, but I'm a newsman first and foremost. And the news cycle it's been there, but it's been less than it normally would be in a traditional summer. So during quarantine, I've been doing a lot of interviews. Every press conference that happens, I'm trying to be a part of it instead of just, waiting for the recording after the fact. Things to try to keep that content and things gotten to do some features on people who are fighting COVID in different ways. So that's been fun. And we have a connection to softball, and they're still, nurses or firefighters or first responders or whatever. So it's definitely been a different non-routine. It kind of sounds funny to say during quarantine, but people honestly at this point, people need something to read. They need something to and that kind of thing, and that's kind of my business. So I want to make sure that the content doesn't stop flowing out just because it might be a little harder to procure, or it might take a little more imagination to put together on my end.
As it's gotten bigger, have you had people come on and kind of help you? Because I'm sure you can't pump out all that content on your own. You have to have a support system. So talk about the people that have kind of worked for you over the years, or come aboard and volunteer their time to help you push out content over the years.
Well, I've got a managing editor named Michael Kylo Kittleson. She used to work for Minnesota Softball and their support staff. She worked for another softball site for a little while, and then she came over to assist me. She does a lot of the social media stuff, the back-end website stuff that truly I don't know what I'm doing with. I have no problem whatsoever admitting that. I'm an internet writer who's not great at the whole tech thing. So she helps in that. She's got a better working knowledge of travel ball and club ball than I do. So that definitely comes in handy as well. In the past, like for last year's World Series, I had a nice staff. I had somebody I know we both know, Cassie Sarchik, and then Megan Turk. And the three of us kind of made staff at the World Series last year. And I will tell you, they blew me away. Like they put me to shame covering the World Series last year. So I'm lucky to have had them and then have Michael now. It's just like you say, kind of help take a little bit of that load off. Even the small things like, writing a game recap of the World Series or helping on the back end of some website stuff. It makes a bigger difference than you might think just in general. And that helps me be able to concentrate more on the content, on the interviews, on the news pieces, and try to keep everything flowing nice and smoothly.
Now, the big thing in the softball world right now is the Athletes Unlimited, starting on August 29th, I believe. What's your take on the way that they're kind of changing the game and the new plans they have, and what you think it'll do for professional softball going forward?
I think it's really intriguing, actually. Well, one thing that for a while now I've felt is that softball, especially professional softball, wasn't appropriately marketing the players. I felt that the message was unclear in that way and honestly a little diluted. And I like the fact that that's what Athletes Unlimited is centering on, is that player-centric marketing. I think the scoring system and the way they're doing the points, obviously it's very unique. And I think that's going to be really interesting because the one thing I think is going to be interesting is if you can keep an audience engaged in that point system. That's one thing I'm very curious to see. But I think it's definitely a positive thing to center on the athletes themselves, to build up their personal brands intentionally, to market them rather than trying to build marketing for just, a random team that nobody would have allegiance to outside of the players and kind of leave the players second tier. Having the players as first tier, the attraction, so to speak, I think is a definite positive thing. And I think Athletes Unlimited, honestly, is here to stay. I think it's the future of pro softball, at least in the near future. And I like the fact that they've been able to bring in some of the big names in softball, but also a very diverse group. You've got college stars from 2 years ago. You've got college stars, a few of them, from 8 to 10 years ago. Team USA players who play pro ball in organized leagues, and some players that are playing pro ball for the first time. So I think it's a really fun mix. I think they've got the right personalities at the forefront. I think they centered on those really well and made some good decisions there. I'm really excited, honestly, to cover them, see what they're going to bring to the table when games start.
I want your take on this because when I was watching the MPF, I always noticed that fans came to the games for the players. Most of the fans came to the game for the players, not for the teams. So there wasn't, like you said, there wasn't that loyalty to the teams, but the MPF seemed like they were marketing the teams instead of the players. And they were both on the wrong page, and I think that's why the MPF kind of fanwood went down. Do you think the Athletes Unlimited saw that and said, hey, let's not focus so much on the teams that people aren't coming to watch anyway, and let's give the fans of professional softball what they want and give it a player-centered league?
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I think when you look at women's sports, they're not to the level of fan attraction to this point that the men's professional leagues are. So I think from Athletes Unlimited perspective, I think they did it the right way. I think they looked at it and said, okay, why is that? And truly, I think they made the smart call because I think player marketing, player engagement is where it's at. You see social media, you see some of the personalities that softball has. I truly believe that softball as a sport has better personalities than any other sport. You look at some of the players in college, you look at some that have gone pro, that have played on Team USA. Some of those pro teams succeeded in very large part because of the personalities and the marketing of those players, and yet the teams didn't focus on that. They didn't realize that. The players kind of were left on their own. So I think Athletes Unlimited did probably look at that and say, okay, what's the missing piece here? The product is good. We know softball does very well on TV. It's a very engaging sport. What's the missing piece? And I think they found the missing formula. And, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen with it. But I think they chose to center on the right thing, which is the players themselves. I think that's what's going to help grow that fan base exponentially in much shorter time.
All right, I'm gonna put you in the spot. What has been, let's say, a top 3 favorite interviews that you've done in your Justin World of the softball career?
Ooh, top 3. Okay. Let me think here. Well, number 1's easy because I just did it a few weeks ago. It was a lady by the name of Billy Harris. She never played college softball. She's not somebody that's going to be a name you recognize probably, but she played softball across 6 different decades. Retired at the age of 74. Incredible lady. I spent close to an hour and a half, 2 hours on the phone with her, and we were able to talk about her career as a whole. She played professional softball back in the 50s and the 60s, and she was just incredible and one of the greatest people I've ever got to chat with. A really sweet lady. I found myself towards the end of the conversation, it was less of an interview and more just of a pleasurable conversation. Finishing up that article now, as a matter of fact, and I've never been more excited, honestly, to publish an article. It's one of those things that as I'm writing it, it's just giving me so much pleasure and so much joy to do that because she really is a special lady. So that's definitely number one. After that one was easy, so I got to think for a minute after that one. Let me see here. I've done a lot of interviews over the years.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I did one just a little while ago, and maybe this is recency bias. I don't know. But I did one just a little while ago with a former player by the name of Laura Boning. She played at St. Louis back in early part of the 2010s, and she actually is now a nurse who is not a nurse. I beg your pardon. She is a medical professional. I always get that wrong, and she playfully chided me on it twice. She's a physician assistant, as a matter of fact. But she actually is working in a COVID-only clinic right now, fighting COVID. So I've known her for a while. She actually was an answer on Jeopardy at one point in time. So she holds that distinction in softball. But to get to do that story on her when I have known her for a while, and for it to be such a unique and special thing of her fighting COVID on the front lines, that's something that I really love doing. And then I need one more. She said top 3. Let me think here. Oh, I'll tell you what. Here's another fun one. I did an interview, and I forget when it was, 2017 maybe. It was a couple of years ago. A lady by the name of Nikki Estrich. She actually played softball at Tennessee for a couple of years, but then she went into acting. And I interviewed her, as a matter of fact, shortly after she had a guest starring role on Law & Order SVU. And that was just something that was pretty cool to me because she played during the Monica Abbott years, so you had some good connections to the Lady Vols program. And then to have that very unique side of her, being in Hollywood, playing on a show like SVU. So that was a pretty cool one I got to do as well. Don't get me wrong. I know I've missed one. I probably missed 5 that would 100% fall on that list. But those are the 3 that came to my mind first.
People are going to be tweeting at you. Hey.
Right, exactly.
What has been kind of your favorite thing to do during this whole hectic COVID-19 month quarantine? What's your favorite quarantine activity? I know you're hard at work because you do a lot on the computer, but maybe away from your work. What's some of the things that you've been keeping up with?
Well, it's kind of odd because the things I do for fun are kind of the things that I do in general for work and that kind of thing. Right after COVID hit and the season got canceled, I had a little bit of time that I kind of into a rut that I ultimately had to dig myself out of. I binged a lot of crime dramas on TV. I enjoy a good NCIS marathon, Blue Bloods, Law & Order. Big Law & Order fan. Some of the people that know me quite well will tell you that I am a Law & Order nerd. I'm very happy about that, don't get me wrong, but that would how they would characterize it. So I watch a little TV here and there. I like to watch, a game show or two in the evening. I mean, granted, it's putting myself in front of another screen, but it's a little bit of mindless entertainment. I like trivia shows, so, kind of keeps my brain going, but I'm not staring at a computer trying to bring words, I'll do a little bit of that most of the time. I like to eat. Unfortunately, I like to eat far too much. So that's been another hobby that's been underscored during quarantine. But really, actually, my biggest things that I've done kind of on the fun side of things, honestly, are the things that I do on the work side of things. Softball stuff. I've really been able to do more research and build the historical archive side of the site and all that, which is something that I really love. Some of the other things that I have my hands in. Like I organize a charity event, so I've been able to put some work into that I might not otherwise be able to do if softball was full force, some things with my church where I volunteer different things. So stuff like that, I've been able to put a little more effort into that I otherwise wouldn't have. But I'm kind of odd that way in that, the stuff that I do for work is the stuff that I find fun. I mean, I know there's not many people that get to say that, but honestly, it sounds cliche, but that's me.
What have been some of the things that you would say to someone or advice that you would give that wants to kind of get into what you do, and maybe it's not softball, but maybe there's a sport out there that they want to cover that they feel like isn't getting the media attention that like softball wasn't, back when you started? What's some of the advice that you give to someone trying to kind of put their foot in the door?
I think two things come to mind there. And one is something I've mentioned a couple of times already. Doing things the right way is worth it. There's been plenty of times over the years where, like I mentioned earlier, I could have said something or written a headline or written a story that was got a lot of clicks, that got a lot of tweets and Facebook shares and that kind of stuff, but it would have been sacrificing, my integrity and my desire to do things the right way. So that's one thing that's underscored several times during my career before softball and then in softball is doing things the right way. It's worth it. It may not seem like it in the moment, but it's worth it. And then secondly, if it's your passion, follow it. When I started in softball, it was something that I really knew I looked forward to. I thought I would enjoy it. And I had a passion for it, but it wasn't like you normally would see a passion. It was something I was like, I want to do this. I was gung-ho for it. It was that kind of passion. As time's gone on, though, I realized I've honestly developed the true kind of passion for it. Like, I like that I spend 16 hours or more working on softball and doing this kind of stuff in softball and doing that and making the trips that I make. Like, it's not the gung-ho kind of passion anymore, although that's still there. It's the true, this is my passion. This is my passion project. I enjoy what I do. And it makes me really glad that, I didn't shy away from the fact that I had no background in college softball or that people might not know who I was in college softball. It makes me really glad that I followed that gung-ho passion to ultimately realize that this is my actual passion.
To bring it back to what YSN does, I mean, we cover so much high school sports, travel sports in the summer. I know, you had to bring someone on that was a little bit more knowledgeable in the travel softball realm, but you still cover it. You see it. What do you think is so special about that age of a softball career and the high school level and the things that kids go through in high school?
Well, I think, that's the age where you're still moldable, I feel like. Your kids are still at an age where, and I don't just mean like the mechanics of their swing or their footwork in the infield, that kind of moldable. That's the most impressionable age. And, it really, in the travel ball, because I cover travel ball, and, in the players that I get to cover and some interviews that I've done and that kind of thing, I really like seeing players that even at that age have intelligence and they have wisdom, because I feel like that's not a common thing in the world in general today. So to see somebody, who's a travel softball player, which may mean they're 14, may mean they're 15, 16, 17, 18, anywhere in that group, but to see some of the things that some of these kids, the intelligence that they have, and the fact that they're willing to, when they go to a camp, a coach says, do this, they're willing to say, that's that would help me. I'm going to do that. And not just because, this coach might then recruit me to their program. The ones that I really enjoy seeing, and honestly, I do enjoy covering them, is the ones that want to be the best version of themselves they can be. And sometimes it's because they want to play D1 softball, they want to play in the SEC type thing. And sometimes it's just because they want to be the best player no matter where they end up playing, the best person. That's what I really enjoy about that travel ball age is, especially being able to seek out the ones who want to be as good as they can be without any asides, as the best way to put it.
Justin, once again, thank you so much for coming on this week. It's been a great experience to have someone on that cover softball instead of someone that is so entwined in softball. I know you got the passion for it just like I do, and I hope that we run into each other at a field someday because we missed our shot one time, and we'll gladly blame Cassie for that one.
We will. I appreciate you having me on, Anthony. This has been a lot of fun.
All right, we'll talk to you again real soon.